As we wind down on this series of apologetics videos from Ravi Zacharias Ministries, I think we have to be very honest that our intrepid apologists really haven't given skeptics anything to seriously consider. After all, it became painfully clear early on that for a series of videos called Does God Exist?, they really had no interest whatsoever in proving that God exists to anyone who didn't already believe it. But this time out, they present a video called Proof. And I'd really like to think that this is where that elusive evidence that has been entirely missing from their apologetics so far are going to appear. So, shall we wait with bated breath as we see just what proof the young Padawans of Ravi Zacharias have for us? Let's look.
Sometimes we're asked the question, can we prove the existence of God? And, it's a strange idea because in one sense, there's a moral intuition that something exists. Like Immanuel Kant talked about two great realities that basically inspired him, the starry heavens above, the moral law within. So there was a basic awareness. And I remember that even as a child, I didn't overtly believe in a God that I followed, but I believed that there was a God out there. It was almost like there was some sense. So can we prove that God exists? I think there are evidential trails, but not proof in the sense of a mathematical proof like 2 + 2 = 4. I think what we use is a sense of arguments that look for what we call the argument towards the best fit. Cumulative case arguments. So we look at various things like in a murder case or a case trying to prove the issue of the guilt of someone in a crime. You have to gather evidence from many different pieces, and the cumulative case argument adds up. In that sense, I think we can point towards the existence of God, the probabilities, but it's not the same as a mathematical proof.
And no, they've got nothing. But none of us are really that surprised, I'm sure. See, we skeptics don't expect them to have any actual proof, even though that would be nice. As I'm sure we all know, proof exists only in alcohol and mathematics. What we want to see is evidence, and that evidence needs to be independent, objective, and testable. Why, you might ask? Because it's the only way to be sure that the things that they're claiming, the things that they are self-assured are true, are actually true in the real world. That's what really matters in this religious argument, whether the claims made by the religions and the religious are actually so outside of the blind faith and utter emotional commitment of their followers. No matter how strongly these people believe in a God, it really only matters if that God actually exists in reality. So, how do we find out if it's so? You can't talk to these people because they're just trying to convince you of something that they already believe, using whatever arguments they can carefully craft that whatever they believe is true, not because they found demonstrable evidence for it, but because it makes them feel good to think so. Well, what difference should that make to anyone? It makes Christians feel good to think God is real. It makes Muslims feel good to think that Allah is real. It makes Hindus feel good to think that Krishna is real. All of these groups are convinced that their beliefs are true for entirely emotional reasons. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. It's our job as skeptics to determine which beliefs are best factually supported and accept only those things which meet a reasonable standard for determining fact. Religions of all kinds have entirely failed to meet those standards.
If by prove we mean equating it with 100% certainty, then no, we cannot prove with 100% certainty the existence of God. But is the existence of God the most probable explanation for all that is? I think we have reasons, we have arguments that have come down through history that make the reasonableness of God and God's existence very, very probable and likely.
There isn't 100% proof that you exist at all. That's an unreasonable standard. But as I think we've shown throughout these videos, the standards pushed by these apologists are really, really, really low. They have preconceived notions that they are philosophically attached to, and they will do anything to provide arguments for that notion while ignoring all the obvious reasons why these arguments are laughably unreliable. The exact same arguments they provide for God can be used for any other God that man has made up for himself to worship. They could equally be used for things that we know aren't true, like the flying spaghetti monster. They really are nonsensical claims, made without objective evidence, presented uncritically because they are desperate to think that what they already accept without reason must be the case, and everyone else just needs to throw up their hands and buy into their faith-based systems of belief or else. The reality is, if someone approached them with the exact same claims and the exact same lack of evidence, but attached some other kind of God to it, they laugh it off. So why should we do any differently?
What do we mean when we say prove? Everyone should have a certain level of certainty that they're looking for, and 100% certainty is just out of the question. We can't be 100% certain that we even exist. We can't have 100% certainty that we're even here when we're talking from a philosophical standpoint. So the question is, how much certainty are you willing to have before you act or believe something? And that's what we need to come up with, thresholds of certainty. What is the most coherent explanation? What's the best explanation for the world around us? And if we look at it from that perspective, as we do everything in life, then we can have very good reason to believe that God exists.
Enough certainty so that we can be reasonably certain that our acceptance of claims is not misplaced. Now, you can't be perfect. Nobody can. But you must be rational and demand that the claims actually represent objective reality, at least to a reasonable degree. So, indeed, we do need thresholds of certainty, but the thresholds for most theists are really pretty ridiculously low. They are only trying to justify beliefs that they already have. They are not trying to verify positions that they've come across in the real world. That's what a skeptic does. They test propositions. They ask questions and expect credible answers, and then they examine those answers to find out if they hold water. They look for other reasonable explanations. It is only after they've done all of this that they give provisional assent to a proposition, but if better information comes along later, they have no problem changing their minds. Faith, especially blind religious faith, is not part of the repertoire of a skeptic.
Most of the time when people ask that kind of a question, they're looking for the type of proof that we really only find in mathematics and maybe some of the hard sciences. But that type of proof is really not necessary, is not even helpful when we are trying to determine whether or not God exists and what our relationship with Him should be. What is more interesting is whether or not we can come to know that God exists and whether we can really have a relationship with Him. And that is not a difficult question to answer, because the answer is yes. God has revealed Himself to us in the person of Jesus Christ.
But you're going off the reservation here. Whether or not God exists and what kind of relationship, if any, we ought to have with this entity are two distinct and separate questions. The existence question has to be answered first, and for that to be answered, we need objective evidence. To pretend that's not important is to take your critical and rational mind and throw it right out the window. Can we know whether or not God exists? I don't know. Certainly we can demand evidence for the existence of God, and if the evidence is satisfactory, we can accept the proposition. But theists have no evidence to present. They only have word games and hand-waving nonsense. We would not accept such things for any other rational proposition. Why in the world would we accept it for the existence of God?
Well, I believe we attempt to prove God's existence or argue for God's existence because the evidence is so strong. It's so compelling that it seems almost illogical to argue against God's existence. So again, if somebody sets out to prove God's existence with 100% certainty, they're likely to be disappointed. But if they set out to show the reasonableness for the existence of God, then I think there are very strong arguments that can be made, and we can have some degree of satisfaction with that. There is grounding, there is a foundation for belief in God.
The evidence is strong? Well, if that was the case, there would be no non-Christians on the planet. Everyone would believe, just like everyone believes that there's a sun in the sky and dirt on the ground. But in fact, religion isn't based on evidence. It's based on wishful thinking, emotional comfort, and, let's be honest, indoctrination and threat. That's not how rational people operate. Nobody has to threaten me with eternal damnation to get me to accept the existence of the moon. They only have to point to the moon. Nobody has to perform rituals and say prayers to get me to believe in gravity. They just have to demonstrate things falling down. So, when are we going to get to that level of evidence for the factual existence of the Christian God? Well, never, of course, but they're not going to be honest about that. I keep thinking that I can't be any more disappointed in these apologists, but I keep being wrong. Essentially, all they've said here is that the standards of the skeptics are too high. Well, no, the standards of the theists are too low. Far too low. Abysmally too low. This is a problem. Instead of being concerned about the actual reasonableness of the arguments presented, they're only interested in the way the beliefs make them feel. Rational people start with evidence and move toward a conclusion. These people start with a conclusion and only seek out evidence that supports it. This is irrational, a logical fallacy, but that's the way that religion operates. Worthwhile beliefs come after critically evaluating the claims made and only adopting belief once those claims have been validated. Religious claims cannot be objectively validated in any way, shape, or form. It's wishful thinking, nothing more, and an ever-growing number of us are learning that logic, reason, and critical evaluation has nothing to do with religion and religious beliefs. In fact, the more logic, reason, and critical evaluation you have, the less anyone with half a clue can continue to do with religion. Well, there's just one more video to go. Do you think that they can pull it out in the end? Yeah, neither do I, but come back next week to see if you're right. Like, share, and subscribe if you liked the video, and please send me ideas for future videos in the comments. I know I've been a one-trick pony for the last couple of weeks, and I really want to know what people want to see next. So, until next time, realize that your beliefs should come from your evidence. Your evidence shouldn't try to justify pre-existing beliefs. Some people, especially these people, are doing it entirely ass backwards.